All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Until then, adios.
Conversations from the Dark Side.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final edition of Conversations from the Dark Side in 2023. I'm your good buddy, your good pal, Amigo Aaron, joined by a man with a diabolical plan. Please welcome Jack Flack himself, Rob Flack Ohara.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's we are at the final. We're at the end of the shows. We're at the Halloween. We're at the end of the spooky season. I hope everybody has enjoyed all the shows up until now. And we've also got Mr. John Boatofcar Shawler hanging out here in the rear of the haunted house. I don't know what the rear room of the haunted house
seems
would be.
appropriate for you, Boat. You're in the. How's it feel to be in the rear end of the haunted house, Boat?
You know, it sure beats being the rear end of the horse. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's not a good Halloween costume. You know, before we get too deep into tonight's chatter, you know, this is going to go out right before Halloween 2023. Are you guys dressing up for Halloween this year, and are you going to parties or anything like that, Flack?
I am not going to parties. I am probably going to dress up. I have not come up with a costume yet. I've got a couple things. I got this. I bought a mechanics, like a jumpsuit, you know, which is kind of looks like something that Jason might wear or something like that. So I think it could be used for that kind of costume, which is scary. It could also be used as the guy that gives you the repair bill on your car, which can also be scary.
That's really super scary right there, as far as I'm concerned, man.
I don't know, but yeah, you know what? It's important to me to keep the tradition of trick-or-treating alive. I don't know if that will continue throughout our lives or our kids' lives. It seems like every year it was going down for a while, and then it's kind of making a comeback. So I don't know, but that's important to me. Is on Halloween is to, you know, be here at the house and give out candy, and as long as kids show up for candy, I'm going to keep giving it out.
Very good, very good. And Bo, did you have any Halloweenish activities coming up?
So the big event for me is always costume day at school.
Yeah,
and I sort of already kind of overplayed my hand because we had Grill Dad Day during Spirit Week last month, and I wore my Fred Flintstone shirt, which would have been a great Halloween costume. But I was like, you know what, that seems like. And then my kids told me that Grill Dad is like some sort of weird internet meme, and I didn't know what it was, and I admitted that I didn't know what it was. And so I also have a Big Lebowski sweater, and I was thinking, man, I could roll into school wearing some sweats and the Lebowski sweater and put a little like protein shake in a cup, and it looks just like a White Russian. And then I thought, well, boy, I might get fired.
That's I was wondering if you lost your mind, Boat. That's what I was just thinking to myself. Oh, Boat's gone insane. You can't do that anymore, Boat. You know, although it's funny, I just watched that movie last night. It's the perfect Halloween viewing. Not really, but
so good. It's so good.
I love it. Do you guys? Did you dress up? Did you have Halloween, like when you were a kid going to school? Did you have Halloween costumes? Do you remember any of those?
Mine all sucked. You know, Halloween was different in the 70s, all right? Unless you were making, like I've seen your old outfits, Flack, and your mom was making the Chewbacca and all Stormtrooper, all cool stuff. Like my mom, worked a full-time job and went to school, and my dad worked a full-time job, and so I didn't even try to get that done. It was the old go down to Rite Aid to pick up the thing in the box. You know, I'd get to pick out the smock of the year, you know, and so I remember going to, like, you know, Batman, and I think one year I went like Richie Rich, which is that's particularly hilarious when you buy a thing that costs like $4. You know, and it wasn't until I got into high school where I started like trying to make my own outfits. You know, I went like everyone goes as a bum. I did that one year, you know, because my clothes were perfect for that, still are. But no, I had like a cavalcade of just like the old box out, like Bucko had just mentioned, the old Ben Cooper, Drazi. Those are the ones I had, and you wore them one time. You never wore them again because they were pretty much trashed. And one thing's for sure, when you wore them, you could not see anything out of your periphery because they were the most dangerous, easily to catch on fire costumes ever made. So yeah, but I mean, we did wear stuff to school. It just it sucked.
You know, in sixth grade, I had two very good friends, and I had a teacher that constantly referred to us as the Three Stooges. And so what we decided we would do is for Halloween, we would dress up as the Three Stooges. And I felt like, maybe, I don't know if everybody feels like this, I felt like I was the leader of the three friends, you know, so that I should definitely be Mo. And then we looked at each other and they were like, you should definitely be Curly. I was like, what? I don't understand, you know.
Everyone thinks they're Mo. That's the problem.
Right. But here's the thing. It turns out that sixth graders have no idea how to dress like the Three Stooges. Like we just put on button-down shirts, and the thing is, we didn't do anything with our hair. So we were just like three guys in button-down, like we looked like the Pep Boys or something. Like we just looked like three guys in shirts, you know, and like three businessmen. And we were like, we're the Three Stooges, and nobody got it. And then later, you know, looking back, I think, yeah, no, there's a reason nobody got it. I do remember
Did you guys work out a routine or anything? You know, like the old.
I mean, we did, sure. You know, we had our little, you know, then people got it. You know, we did the curly shuffle or whatever. I have a picture of me with the costume that I wore to kindergarten, which was I was a ghost. And I was wearing, my mom made this costume for me, and it was it was kind of tailored, but it was basically a white sheet, but it kind of went around my head and then came in at the neck and then went back out. And then around my neck, my mom tied this green rope really tight and then in a knot. And so when I see those memes online that say like, hey, I'm so old, I remember, you know, I used a phone with a cord or whatever. And I think I'm so old that I had I'm old enough that we wore Halloween costumes where parents tied a rope around your neck and a knot and thought that was a good idea for a 5-year-old.
It's amazing we didn't come across multiple atrocities in the street. Just kids on fire, kids hung from trees, you know. But I mean, kids were tough. They made it, you know. Trick or treat. We sort of touched this last year, but trick or treat was later. It was less. There were less parents in the mix than there are now. And there were, for me in this neighborhood anyway, there were tons and tons more kids than I see now. I just don't see as many kids. I don't know if there's just less kids or there are less kids that are trick-or-treating. I don't know what it is. But it was like herds of kids. As far as the eye could see, it was great. You know, you were out there to have a good time. And I kind of feel bad for the kids now because now me and Luke, when we went around, which last year was his last year, I think, we made our rounds, we got our candy, and then we hoofed it back. There wasn't that much mingling with the other kids. Or really, I don't think he even paid attention to the other kids' costumes. You know, none of that stuff. And, you know, and it was almost like a chore. I mean, he told me last year was his last one. You know, so that was kind of sad, too. But I don't know. It seems like Halloween has become a bigger deal for the adults and less a big deal for the kids.
Oh, do you remember the last year that you trick-or-treated? Like there was you got to a
Absolutely.
certain age. Yeah,
it was my sophomore year of high school, and we went around. I remember it was me and some of my buddies from the band, and one of the girls that went with us, she was dressed up as Marilyn Monroe, and she was gorgeous. She was one of the girls in the band, and but yeah, and it was just one of those things where it wasn't like, man, this is going to be our last year. But I think that was the last year that none of us could drive. When you drive, everything changes.
Yeah.
When you can drive, it's all different.
In Oklahoma, of course, you could get a motorcycle license at 14. And so I had a buddy named Lewis who also had a motorcycle. And so our birthdays were late. So the following year, I would have been 15 on Halloween, and he worked at a like a feed store, you know, and he got the night off for Halloween. And so we said, so first of all, we decided we were going to dress up as the Blues Brothers, which neither one of us had a black suit and a black hat. So I had a blue, like denim jacket, and then I don't know, a hat that my mom probably got from a garage sale, and then Lewis showed up wearing a jacket and like a fedora, like almost like a Panama Jack, like a straw hat, and had painted his face like a ghost. And I was like, "What are you doing?"
I thought you were going to say that he went in blackface.
Oh,
like,
God.
No, different Halloween. So we met with our motorcycles. And that was our plan, was to drive around on our motorcycles to go trick-or-treating, like do a block and then move, you know? And so we met up and we drove to this neighborhood and we parked and we went up to the first house and we knocked and the guy opened the door and he goes, "Aren't you guys a little old for this?" And we just stood there and I went, "Yeah." Like, it just hit me at that one moment. I go, "Yeah, I think we are," you know, and we just went and got on our motorcycles and went home. You know, like I was thinking, you had to take off work to go trick or treating. Like, I think this is over for us. So it had never hit me until that exact moment, you know, when that guy just kind of confronted us and said, you know, I think this might be it. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right. Like when you can go to the store and buy your own candy, I think it's over, you know?
You know, the sad thing
And that's,
is,
you know, that's another thing too. And Aaron,
ahead,
you've
Boat.
talked about this before, is that, you know, I think it's the big thing that's different with kids these days is that candy is just readily available, you know? Like when we were kids, candy was not something that you could just reach into the cabinet and grab. You know, it wasn't like there was endless supplies of candy. I have a feeling for a lot of kids these days, if they want to get candy, their parents have got a stash of candy somewhere 24/7 and then they can get it. So that probably has something to do with the lack of enthusiasm with kids as well.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Boat. I think that you might be onto something there because I remember as a kid, like getting a candy bar or something was I mean, God, we sound old, but it's Boat's younger than us, but it's true. Candy's much more readily available than it was. One trip down the Dollar Tree, you can load up. You know, there's been candy here all week for 2 weeks, and we've been nibbling on it. You know, the tree picked up. Another part of it, I think that kids hung with it longer. I mean, I was out trick or treating. I kid you not. I know I went out. I was either 15 or 16 when I stopped. I went out that year, and I didn't give a crap because I wanted candy, and it was also I looked forward to it every year. It was like a kid holiday, and I don't know if kids look at it the same way. I mean, my boy gets excited to wear a costume, but I don't necessarily think the act of trick or treating is like a huge deal for him.
You know, we get a few older kids, and when we get older kids, I will give out candy to them. Like, I don't cut off people, but they got to be in a costume. Like, sometimes you get the older kids and they just show up and they're just dressed, and I go, what are you doing? Like, no, you know. And I'll tell you what bugs me is when the parents, like, you give the candy to the kids and the parents stand there, they're like, "Oh, you got any Reese's in there?" I'm like, Go to Big Lots.
Yeah, that's low end right there for sure.
Yeah.
Now, as adults, as we allegedly are, when did you stop when did you stop going to the old Halloween parties, or do you still go to the big drunken? You know, I used to go to some like tear it down style Halloween parties, especially as I was, you know, moved out of into my 20s and 30s. I used to hold some big parties, and then my friends just stopped having parties, and then there is no party for me anyway. Do you find that your friends are still doing the parties? Have you thrown one recently? I remember the last time I threw one, Stranger Things had just came out because we built the sheet with the letters on it and all the Christmas lights. Remember that shtick? So it wasn't too long ago. It was a fairly successful party, but man, I don't think I've been to one after that. Are you guys still getting out there into the party scene?
No, see the thing is, I think what happens is you go to the party scene and then you have kids, or the people who were throwing the party had kids, and then it all stops for a long time. But now, my kids just moved out. My friends' kids have moved out, so we may bring it back. You know, it may be something that we start doing. The last big Halloween party that we had was my buddy Jeff threw it, and this was right after Blair Witch. And what we did was we went and got rolls of butcher paper and put them on the walls, and then we put our hands in red paint and put all these handprints on the wall. And we made the little, Blair Witch stickmen and hung them on things, and it was really great. And when he took the butcher paper off, we found where the paint had soaked through.
Oh man, not good.
Remnants of red handprints on the wall. So it was definitely a spooky Halloween, to be sure.
Boat, are you doing any partying? Boat is a guy that throws parties. I don't know. Have you thrown a Halloween party recently, Boat?
When I was in college, you guys might not know this, but Athens, Ohio, is recognized as having the largest Halloween celebrations in the country. That's a fact.
I did not know. I knew, we were just talking last week that area was sort of had a reputation for the paranormal, but I didn't realize that was part of it.
So when I was in college, Halloween was the biggest event of the year, and you always went uptown, and it was crazy time all the time. These days, I feel like, I don't know, it's weird. You're talking about how like it's a bigger deal for the adults now than it was for the kids, but I scan a lot of old pictures for people, and like there's tons of like grown-ups getting down and funky during Halloween back in the 70s. Like that was definitely a thing that grown-up Halloween parties were definitely going on back then. So that's not a new thing for older folks to dress up and stuff. I wouldn't be against throwing a Halloween party. Like you said, the last one I went to was at your place, and it was cool. It seems like it was right after you built the arcade. Because the arcade was still,
I forgot about that. Yeah,
you could go in there and it was like an arcade, and it was a good party. It was and you had the fire outside and everything. So I think you want to have, but the biggest problem is that we just don't have any other friends. All our friends are just the same guys.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I used to have parties in Lexington when I lived there, and it would be a drunken, debaucherous mayhem. That's the way I like them, by the way. And then when I moved here and had parties, they were more like tipsy. The debauchery had been watered down to like slightly risque. And then after a while, the Halloween parties consisted of the people that come to Taze Valley Classic Computer Club wearing goofy outfits, and then eventually they just stopped wearing costumes. So it was basically like just having another Taze Valley Classic Computer Club meeting, except it was people said boo, I guess, would be the only difference. Right. So it's kind of a bummer. Now I feel bad for not having a big throwdown. So that means next year we've got to plan something, and then we'll just do the conversations for the Darkside live from the party. That might be kind of fun.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Before we move along, I've been looking at some of the stuff in the that our chatters have been saying here. I wanted to mention a couple of things that I read in here. One of the things I had to laugh. Ben666 said he once gave sweets to a kid and a Bacardi Breezer to his older sister, who had clearly been made to take her brother around to the houses. So he's giving out booze over there, which I think that's funny. Texas Foosballer says his kids are super stoked for Halloween every year, and they really get into it, and they love it over there. So it's good to see that they're kicking that out over there. Buck Owens, we were talking about how little candy we got back in the day. He says he got one candy item per week at the grocery store, and he got a comic book. Not too bad. Draz says that chocolate candy was gold. I agree with you on that. I had a couple people in here, like a couple guys said that when they were kids, their families just didn't have the money to get them costumes. And I will say, I understand where you're coming from there, it was always tough. Times get tough on people, and it's tough on the kids the most. And they remember that stuff. So hopefully, all the people that had trouble back in their childhood that missed out on Halloween are kicking it in now. That we're.
Can you guys still feel the pain of sticking your tongue through a little hole in one of those plastic masks. That feeling is still so evocative to me. When you strap one of those things and you're like, man, I bet I can fit it through.
Great when you pulled it back in. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's funny. I didn't know if you'd actually gotten. Of course, both there's that classic footage of you at Halloween, as I recall.
That's
that we
right.
played
The
last
Batman
year.
costume.
Yeah, but I was looking here at what people dressed up as, and I see Casper, a bum, and Evil Knievel. I think I probably went as Knievel back in the day. I liked vampires. So I'm sure that was another one I did. So hey, it's funny that there's a shared consciousness when it comes to Halloween, a shared experience that we all sort of got more or less back in the day. Now, with all that said, we're going to take a quick pause here. When we come back, we're going to get into straight up ghost story action here. Jack Flack has assembled some winners here. We've got some other stuff to get into. It should be a good time. So stick around. After the break, we will get into it hard and heavy. This is Conversations from the Dark Side.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side. You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
And we're back with Conversations with the Dark Side. Myself, Rob, Flack O'Hara, and the spookiest of the bunch, John Boatofcar Shawler. He's unseen, but he's around, all ever present. Tonight, Flack, you put together what I would call a macabre menu of scary experiences and ghost stories. And we're going to kick that off. What have you brought to the table tonight, Flack?
Well, the first thing, we of course, we wanted to tell some ghost stories and some spooky stories. And I wanted to tell you about a local hotel that you guys probably have not heard of. It is the Skirvin Plaza. The Skirvin Plaza is in downtown Oklahoma City. It is Oklahoma's oldest hotel. It was built in 1911. Right off the bat, I mean, this seems like a spooky sign, but it's made up of 3 towers, and each of the towers has 13 floors. So I don't know, it just seems like a odd design to begin with, But the Skirvin is one of those really old style hotels. You have got the big fancy woodwork. You've got the little, they have the little chaise lounges outside of the rooms, like a little sitting area before you go into your room. So it's really old style, kind of fancy. But there is an old rumor ever since as long as I've been around, that the Skirvin is haunted. And A lot of people have reported hearing weird things at the Skirvin, seeing things, experiencing doors open and closing and things like that. There is one particular room that is supposed to be more haunted than the others. It is room 1015. The original owner of the Skirvin, his name was W.B. Skirvin.
Bad
and apparently
name.
he had an affair with a maid whose name was Effie, and they apparently room 1015 was where they met to have their torrid affair, and she ended up getting pregnant, and there's no essentially what happened is she, for some unknown reason, leapt out of the window of room 1015 to her death. And so ever since then, people who stay in room 1015 claim to hear a baby crying in the middle of the night, or some, there's all kinds of spooky things that go on. But what's really interesting about the Skirvin Plaza is that because it is right downtown, it is right across from the building that they built, the stadium for our NBA team, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And so when visiting teams come to Oklahoma City, a lot of times they stay at the Skirvin Plaza. And so in 2010, the New York Knicks, who were, had a much higher rating than the Oklahoma City Thunder at the time, got beat really bad by the Oklahoma City Thunder. And afterwards, they said, we couldn't get any sleep in that hotel. That place is haunted. They said there was all kinds of noise and things like that. And so this kind of became a thing in that same year. The Chicago Bulls also said they reported that their doors were slamming shut and there were strange sounds, and it was all blamed on, ghosts at the Skirvin Plaza. In 2012, the Miami Heat said the same thing. There was we have a lot of women's softball here and women's basketball tournaments here. And in 2013, the Baylor Lady Bears came here. They were the champions. They were the previous champions, and they were by far favored to win this tournament, and they got knocked out by another team. It is listed as one of the biggest upsets in women's basketball, and they blamed it on the Skirvin Plaza. They said that place is terrible. We can't get any sleep. There's cold drafts and weird things. So a lot of sports teams that come and stay in downtown Oklahoma City, there was actually a rumor that when teams would call and they didn't know where to stay, that Oklahoma City places would tell them to stay at the Skirvin in hopes that they would have a bad stay downtown. And by the way, it is known, everybody here knows it at the Skirvin Plaza, but it has been purchased a couple of times, and it is now officially the Skirvin Hilton Hotel. So it is a official Hilton hotel downtown, but everybody still calls it the Skirvin Plaza. There was a time when the Brooklyn Nets came here, and that was when Kyrie Irving was on the team, and he had such a terrible night's sleep. He said he was haunted by nightmares, and Kyrie Irving said he's going to produce a documentary about how haunted the Skirvin is. So that hasn't happened yet, but there may be a documentary about the Skirvin Plaza coming out one of these days. That'd be interesting to say. I will tell you that for my wife's, for our 10th wedding anniversary, instead of going out of town or going to do something, we just decided to get a hotel room somewhere, and we ended up getting a room at the Skirvin Plaza. And so I was very excited. Kind of, like you kind of hope that something haunted happens or whatever. We didn't see any ghosts or have anything. The closest we saw to a ghost was in the morning. We went down to the breakfast thing, and Vince Neil from Motley Crue was down there having breakfast. So that was
Big fat
the
ghost.
Closest to anything scary we saw. But so we didn't have a scary experience at the Skirvin, but I was kind of hoping to. So I'll just wonder if you guys have any, any local hotels or anything like that. Do you have anything around there up that way?
I will say before we get into that, I have heard the tales about the sports team because I've been a sports guy. This made the rounds, and it's probably one of the biggest ghost stories in the history of sports. This hotel, so there is something to that. Now, if I'm a team that is favored to win and I go in there and get stomped, I'm going to start looking around for a good scapegoat, and the ghost hotel is as good as any. But it's still, there is something to it because it happened over and over. Ghost hotels. Any thoughts?
Well, there's that place up in Point Pleasant that you and Tree stayed at, right? That place is supposed to be
the
haunted.
Lowell, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
We have in fact, it's funny, for those that listen to conversations last week when I talked to Tree about her recent exploits, they just filmed a show in Point Pleasant. It was actually 2 weekends ago for national TV somewhere. And they were there was a Mothman investigation, but one of the things they were doing was investigating the very haunted, allegedly, Low Hotel. The Low is so old that they used to use secret passages that run from the bottom of it to the river to smuggle in bootleg liquor. It's been around for a long time, and by American standards of old. You have to preface that given the listening audience, but by our standards, it's a pretty old hotel. I've investigated that hotel. I've been up and down the hotel. There's large chunks of it that are just in ruin that just never got around to fixing. So they just are just trashed all a year round, but they're slowly getting through it. It's got a beautiful marble staircase, and there's a big jade. There's a bunch of jade down in the foyer, and when there's a big chandelier, it's beautiful when you walk into it. The problem is the owners are real tyrants. I guess the ghost hunters really bug them and the Mothman people because they're real tough when people try to go in there. Even the people when Tree was back filming, they had express written permission to be in there and still got hassled by the front desk chick. So if anyone haunts that joint, it's the very angry management. But you can imagine being in downtown Point Pleasant. You're not dealing with the average overnight stayers. You've got the goofiest freak boys and girls all descending on your town, especially around the Mothman Festival. So, but it is a beautiful hotel. I'm trying to think if I've ever been in any other. I was in the Anchorage, which is up just outside of Parkersburg, and the Anchorage was a club. It was a hotel. It's been a bunch of other things in its existence. It's a pretty creepy place. We did some EVPs, electronic voice phenomena recordings in the basement of it. We had to find a secret door to get into the basement. It was a real weird place, and got down in there, and it was pretty creepy. I would say would I say it was haunted? No, I didn't see a ghost or experience anything, but other people have. So those are the two that come to mind. And from my experience, I know Lexington's got a haunted hotel that is downtown, but I don't think I was ever in it. I heard rumors about it. I guess every town has some sort of little, some sort of hotel that has a story. Boat, you've lived everywhere. Boat, is this something? Have you heard tales when you went to different countries and stuff about, haunted this or spooky that?
Oh yeah. Well, in Thailand, the way that they view the supernatural is totally different than the way that we do. They are accepting of the supernatural in a way that we are not, where it's sort of taken as a matter of course that there are spirits and there are ghosts and there are things that are out there that are just there, and it's as real as you and me. And so, Eep has told me some stories about when, like her mom seeing things in the jungle because, back in the day, when you had to get up in the middle of the night to do your business, you went out to the jungle,
yeah.
And she remembers seeing lights in the jungle, and this is decades before electricity made its way out that way, things like that. And of course, the whole spirit house thing, which I think we've talked about before on Conversations from the Dark, Darkside, where people erect these houses, these miniature, almost dollhouse like houses in front of their houses, is a way to attract the spirits to come and stay there and sort of haunt these little houses rather than haunt their actual houses.
Pretty neat. You mentioned something there. When you're and maybe this is happening to you, Flack. I don't know how often you camp, but I think you went. Seems like you mentioned you've gone camping a lot, but somewhat back in the day. There's not a spookier experience than being in the woods somewhere and seeing a light up on a hill or hearing something off in the distance, and you can see how spooky things were written or why people back in the olden days found religion or whatnot very quickly, because that is a chilling effect, especially, and when you're a modern person, you're used to that sort of thing. That's one thing, but you can imagine someone seeing dancing lights on the hillside or hearing a weird scream out in the woods that was, a pioneer or a fur trapper or something. It would be, I've been in the woods and seen lights, the old fire on the mountain. I've seen that before, several places. And you never, could it be someone up there with a lantern? Sure. But whoever it is, it's in the middle of the night, and they're at the top of that mountain with a light. Like, why are they up there? Who are they? It's creepy stuff.
My grandpa and uncle, they split a big area of land, and since my grandpa passed away, my uncle has it all, but it's about 200 acres in southeast Oklahoma. And I can tell you for a fact that being out in the woods during the day is different than being out in the woods at night. It is a whole different ball game, and when that sun starts going down and the shadows start stretching out across things and you start thinking that you might have seen something, whether or not you saw something move or whatever, it's different, So
yeah. It's between when it comes to the getting back to the hotel situation, if you go into a hotel that is haunted, I wonder if it doesn't taint your mind a little bit to the experience. Because I always, normally if I go to a place to investigate it, I assume it's haunted. I don't know if I've ever personally been in a hotel that I didn't have any idea was haunted and got scared about a haunting. So I guess by that definition, I've never had any experiences in a hotel.
Well, I have. And that's the next thing that's on my list is the Midland Railroad Hotel, which is located up in Kansas. This is a hotel that, if you Google it, is listed as one of the most haunted hotels in Kansas. But we didn't know that. Now, this is a story that Boat could probably relate to. When a few years ago, when our daughter was in high school band, we got an offer from another school that said they would give us their old band props. And all we had to do for like the football, the big presentation, right? For
the halftime shit.
Yes. And all we had to do was come get them. And of course, as parents of band participants, you're supposed to volunteer a certain amount of hours, but basically we found out that if we would drive to Kansas, pick this stuff up, and come home, we would be off the hook.
Yeah.
So
that's this is every band parent is waiting for an opportunity like this, that you can knock everything out at once.
And we jumped on it. So we drove, and my wife found a hotel to stay at, which turned out to be the Midland Railroad Hotel, which, if you look it up like on Yelp, it says two things. Number one, it says most haunted hotel in Kansas, and the second line says free Wi-Fi. So I was like, well, there's a little something for everybody, right? And so but the thing was that, to be 100% honest with you, we did not know that this place was supposedly haunted when we stayed there. And again, it was one of these old style hotels. It's a 3-story hotel, so it's a more of a large square building. It's not like a new high-rise type hotel. It's an old building. And we didn't have any, hear any odd sounds. We didn't experience anything, spooky or anything like that. We had a great night's sleep. It was a very nice place to stay. And the following morning when we woke up, room service came. Someone knocked on the door to drop off room service. And I turned to my wife. I said, "Oh, did you order breakfast, room service or something?" And she said, "No, I didn't." And I said, and then she looked at me. I go, "I didn't do anything, And so I got out of bed and I went and opened the door, and there was nobody there. And I was like, "Did you hear somebody at the door?" She said, "Yeah, somebody totally knocked on the door, And I kind of looked up and down the hallway and I didn't see anybody. So, there's a lot of explanations for that, and I didn't think anything about it at the time,
Did you hear them say room service? Was that?
No, just heard someone knock on the door, and so we just assumed that then it must have been, that was my assumption that somebody was bringing breakfast or the bill or something, And so later, as we were checking out or whatever, the person said, "Did you have any, they had like flyers about it being haunted." And I think she said something about it. I was like, I had no idea this is supposedly haunted. But I looked up online and there's a story about how this hotel is haunted, and supposedly it is haunted by a small orphan girl who lives on the 3rd floor, which happened to be where we were. And they said many people have reported hearing knocks on the walls and doors by this orphan ghost girl. And I was like, "Do you think there was a ghost that knocked on our door this morning?" I don't know who knocked on our door. We didn't see anybody out in the hallway. So I have no explanation to that. I really have no explanation as to what happened there. But it was funny, it wasn't like beforehand that we knew the story and we were waiting to hear something and say, "Hey, that was a ghost knock." I didn't know anything about the story until after the knock and after we had left. So it was kind of a strange experience. Was it a ghost? Was it the wind rattling the door? Did some kid run by and knock on the door and run off? I don't know. I didn't see. All I can tell you is when I opened the door, there was nobody out in the hallway when I went out.
I'll tell you, I think I can speak for Boat when I say this. I am all for a ghost that orders room service. If that's a thing, I'm down. You can haunt my hotel room every night, brother. Set me up. Yeah. That's creepy stuff right there. It's like I said, the way you deliver that. I mean, it's a mundane act but here you are all these years later still thinking about it. So it's one of those things that it doesn't hit you at the time, but you have time to mull it over, So now you wonder, what the hell was that?
You're right though. I mean, as kids, we heard all these ghost stories. The guy with the hook hand, or what was it, Bloody Mary, who would appear in the mirror, the decapitated head of Bloody Mary and all this. But that's what I want, is one that delivers waffles. Like if I could get that ghost that shows up in my hotel room, I'm okay with that one. That's a haunting I will take.
Before we move on here, we got a actual voicemail. I can't believe it. On the line here, and I want to play this.
All right.
And this is from your good buddy Drazi there. I want to make sure I've got this rigged right. So I'm going to try to run this, and we'll see how it goes here. So bear with.
Hey, Aaron.
Let me turn up the volume on this thing.
When I was a little boy,
all right, can everybody
my
hear that?
grandparents lived in Cleveland, and they had
We'll
a
start
very
it over.
Hey, Aaron. It's Drew. How you doing, man? I think I got a tale for you. When I was a little boy, my grandparents lived in Cleveland, and they had a very old house. They had a bathroom only on the 2nd floor, and the one room that you had to pass to go to the bathroom was always, didn't matter if the house was 90 degrees, it was always ice cold. And I had this unnatural fear of this room for some reason. And no, it was unused, it was unoccupied. Later on, when I grew up, my grandmother at one point ended up making it her bedroom, and when us kids would spend the night, I still, even with her there, was terrified of the room. So it got so bad that I just didn't feel right about this room, that I would literally tell everybody downstairs at family functions, I'm going to the bathroom. And they'd be like, okay, that's fine, Scott, no worries. No, I'm going to the bathroom. And I was saying this in case I didn't make it back. I don't know. I've never had this fear since. So all that said and done, my grandparents, they moved away. Eventually the house was torn down. And fast forward about 20 years, which now, even in hindsight, was 15 years ago, I was talking to my mom about the house, and we were just chit-chatting, and her and my aunt, that was one of their playrooms, and she told me that room was always unnaturally cold. And I said, okay, maybe it's just being an older house or whatever. And she goes, yeah, we had a ghost in there. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, yeah, there was a leather chair in there that was old, and my aunt, her sister, my aunt and her would be playing as little girls, and all of a sudden they would see an impression on the chair, and the room would get even colder where they could see their breath. And this even happened, whether it was winter or summertime. And I asked her, I said, didn't this freak you out? She said, no, it's our Casper, if you will. And I said, and that's when I started divulging that why I always told her, hey, I'm going to the bathroom because I had to pass said room and I was terrified of the room. And she said, really? I never knew that. And I said, yeah. And she goes, funny thing, when I moved, the next house, I noticed that there were some odd things taking place. But my grandma, her mom, still lived at the old house. And I said, really? And she said, I think the ghost followed me. And I said, oh, okay. So my sister one time, she was babysitting us because we were younger, we were all alone and we were all together watching a movie on TV, and all of a sudden the microwave went off. I thought, we all looked at each other like that was weird. And then about a half hour later, the toilet flushed. Now we're freaking out. Like, are you serious? And again, I didn't know this story about the supposed ghost traveled to the new home. So when my parents got home, I told them about that, and then my mom just...
And there you go. That's where the voicemail cut off. Good, creepy stuff there. Just to recap, John said he used to be fearful of going to the bathroom at this house, and it turns out that his grandmother told him, yes, in fact, was a ghost living in there, and when she moved, apparently the ghost went with her. And as they sat and watching TV, the new I guess it's a bathroom ghost, would be more. At one point was flicking the light on and off, and it flushed. Eventually, he turned the microwave on, and then he flushed the toilet. So this is still, that would be super creepy because that's one thing that's not going to happen if there's no one in the house and the toilet flushes on its own. That is not going to happen unless you've got a really highfalutin potty in there. So that was good stuff. Good creep. It's funny when a lot of people have these memories of either their house or relatives' houses that have spooky areas in them. Sometimes they live there, sometimes they're visiting. Has that ever happened to you, Boat? Did you ever have a relative or stay at a family friend or whatever that had a spooky part of the house you didn't like to go to or had a rep?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to, one of my best friends growing up lived out Charlie's Creek.
Oh, man, that's way out.
Yeah, you're going way out. And the plumbing in this house was such that whenever you would run any sort of water or take a shower or anything, it would creak and it would moan. And it used to freak me out. And I used to get so scared. I'd spend the night at this kid's house all the time. And he had this big, carnival-style dog, like you'd win at a dart throw or something. and I used to, barricade myself under that thing at night. Because, I would hear, the pipes moan and groan.
Yeah.
And it used to freak me out.
It's odd that you would pick a carnival-sized, huge doll to sleep under.
Well, you got to cover up, because if the ghost comes in, if he sees the dog, he'll move on.
What if the dog was the ghost? You didn't think about that,
would be an
did
interesting twist.
Flack, did you ever live any place that creeped you out? You lived in a lot of places over the years.
Yeah, I don't know that I did have, we had a house, the first official house that my wife and I bought together was actually built in 1880, which was, I believe 26 or 27 years before Oklahoma was a state. This was an old house. And it definitely had When the wind would blow, it would blow right through the walls, through the windows. It was always creaking. It was always making noise. To be honest with you, there was a lot of parts in that house where we were in a part of town where it was like there were some like a lot of unhoused people who would take refuge and basically sleep anywhere they could. So like we had a shed that was almost a lean-to. I mean, it had a dirt floor, just a little wooden shed in the backyard. And we had always like there was evidence that people had slept in there or were sleeping in there, things like that. So I was always I was more scared of the residents in town than I was of the ghosts, But yeah, if any place was going to be a creepy house, that was definitely it for sure.
Hey,
you know what?
Oh, go ahead.
I just had one memory. We had we bought after that house, we bought a newer style house, a house built in the 80s, 90s, something like that. And I do remember when we were touring the house, the realtor was showing us the house. There was like a nursery room, like a kid's, bedroom type thing. And there was a closet, and it wasn't, like a huge walk-in closet, just a normal closet, And on the door handle, there was a lock where you would lock it, but it was on the outside. So it wasn't a lock, like to get it like a safe room. A safe room, if you got inside, you'd lock it from the inside, But this door was set up to lock something in that closet. And that always creeped me out.
Maybe they hated their kids.
I mean, who knows? Who knows why would you have a closet where you could lock something, something that could obviously open a door handle, so it's not a pet or something? And that always bothered. We changed that door handle because that bothered me so much. So I don't know what the story was about that, but that was just an area like when you just get like a bad vibe about an area, I got that about that closet. I don't know what the story was, but that always bothered me for some reason.
Yeah, man, that would get me too. I've watched too many old TV shows where they had like a murder child, or like Rosemary's Baby lives in there, or that little freak. Who's the little kid that rode the tricycle all over the place? The little devil kid. I can't remember his name.
Oh,
the Omen kid.
Oh yeah, I thought you were talking about Danny from The Shining.
Oh yeah, well no, I don't blame him.
Damien was that kid's name, right?
What's that?
Yeah, Damien.
That's it, Bode. Good stuff there, and thank you again, Drazi, for sending that in. I love that stuff. And listen, I mentioned it. I haven't mentioned this show. I'm going to mention it one more time. The automated voicemail line is up till the end of the show. So if you've got any interesting stories you want us to put on the show, you've got about an hour of TV time remaining before we finish up for the year. You can text or call the number on the screen. Flack, you had another great suggestion as a talking point for this evening. Why don't you take it away, my friend?
Well, this is a ghost story that I had this book when I was a kid. It was a Reader's Digest book. It was called Strange Stories, Amazing Facts. And it had all these different chapters. It had a chapter of like, amazing things around the world. And it talked about the world's highest waterfall and things like that. And then there was another one that was like the future of space travel, and it talked about, things in the solar system. And then there was a giant thing in the middle that was like, these are the world's most terrifying stories, which I would flip to and read at night, when I was 8 years old, and read all these terrifying ghost stories about haunted houses or just incredibly, this is like where I learned about Jack the Ripper and Spring-Heeled Jack and all these things that were all in this book, all in one chapter. And one of the stories in there was called the Belmez Faces. I might be not pronouncing because it's Spanish. It's either Belmez or Belmez faces. It's also known as the Faces of Belmez. There's the nickname for this house was called the House of the Faces, which sounds creepy right off the this happened in or began happening in Spain in 1971. There was a family and it was the Herrera family who lived in this house. I guess the town is Belmez, and the family was in their house, and this was a old style house that had concrete floors. And they went into the kitchen, and on the floor were these ghostly faces. The faces just appeared out of nowhere. They appeared, and they looked like people's faces. And there were reports. Now, some of the reports have been questioned later as to their authenticity, but the family said they tried everything they could to get rid of the faces. They covered them up. They said the faces would move. The family said they tried to scrub the faces. They put like bleach and stuff on the floor and tried to scrub the faces off, and the faces like turned to anguish, like pain, like when they were being scrubbed. It's absolutely
they didn't like
horrifying.
the scrubbing. That's what you're saying.
No. And so the father went and got a pickaxe and destroyed the floor. Because they could not get rid of these ghostly faces that were appearing on their concrete floor. He chopped up the floor and they brought in more concrete. Well, now other people said, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you chop up your floor? And so the story got out that there were these ghostly faces appearing on their floor. So they poured new concrete on the floor and the faces came back. There were a couple of different faces. There was a woman's face. There was one that is known as the bald man. And the people, this Pereira family, said, we don't know what to do, and we're going to destroy the floor again. And then the local city, the officials came and they were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to cut out these squares of the floor so that they could be analyzed. So they actually cut sections of these people's floor out and removed them. And by the way, these still exist. And so you can look online and see, if you look up Belmez, it's Belmez, you can see these ghostly faces that appeared in the concrete. Now, like a lot of ghost stories, there were a lot of ghost stories in the 70s that didn't hold up in the 80s or 90s. Like, you could tell a ghost story in Spain in the 70s and go, oh, that sounds like a good ghost story. But then in the 90s, when people start investigating it, they go, maybe this story doesn't stand out, right? And so these investigators in the 90s, they took one of the samples. And by the way, I think it's important to say that the family cooperated with every investigator. The family was like, please find out what these faces are, and they seemed legitimately scared and confused by these ghostly faces that were appearing in their floor. And so in the 90s, an investigator took the floor and they did some samples and they found some things that kind of pointed to maybe the family was in on it. They found high levels of, among other things, zinc. And zinc, they also found possible traces of acid. And so both of these things, zinc would be something that you would find in a paint that might be applied, or a stain that might be applied to concrete to paint one of these faces, or it's something that could have been etched maybe with an acid or things. And by the way, there were three people. I think there was a married couple and their son who lived in the house. But the married couple said, we didn't do this. Like, we don't know, we can't explain that, but we didn't do this. So suspicion kind of pointed to maybe the son had done some of this, and the parents didn't know about it or something like that. But I want to fast forward about 20 more years because there are even more advances in technology. And in 2014, the scientists said, hey, we could do all these other studies now and look at things. And when they looked at it, they said, we think that's the amount of zinc that you would find anyway in concrete. We don't think there's additional zinc on this. And we don't think that it was faked. And if it was faked, we can't reproduce it. So the investigators kind of flip-flopped from the 90s when they said, we think these are definitely fake, to 2014 where they said, if they were faked, we don't really know how they faked them. So that's kind of where it stands today. Now, there are some, different possible explanations from the psychic community. A lot of people think that maybe there was, they call it thoughtography, which is an instance where people think of an image and it projects onto a physical object. And so they think maybe that could have been what was happening in this situation. There are other people who think the kid did it. They think the son Daniel was in there at night painting faces on stuff. Now, I don't see how he could make faces that would change or would show pain or anguish when they were trying to scrub them and get rid of them. So I don't know, but I do know that the Belmez house, the House of Faces, is open for tourism. If you happen to be in Spain, you could go to this house, and they have faces from the floor that had been cut out on display. And you could go see those things. They're still there today. So this is a story that haunted me as a child. I would put this up there with me being afraid to take a bath after seeing Jaws. I remember going to the kitchen in the middle of the night to go get a drink of water and looking at the tile and making sure there was no faces on the floor. This story terrified me to death. So that is the story of the Belmez faces. I'm interested to see what you guys think about that story.
What'd you think about that one, Boat?
Well, it is interesting, and it shows you, because I've read about things like this before where, I think about something outside of the realm of ghost stories, but something like the Shroud of Turin. I'm sure you guys have heard about this before. It's this piece of cloth that purportedly, Christ was wrapped in after his crucifixion, and it bears all of these there's a picture that's sort of embedded on it and things like that. And it seems like the authorities kind of flip-flop back and forth with knowing exactly how it was done to not being able to explain any of it. And, it just goes to show, you just got to keep an open mind about stuff sometimes. And, who's to say what the story is? But it is weird how that sort of phenomenon was combined to just, was confined to just the one house. You said there was never any explanation given, like, why the faces appeared, right?
No, the family was completely confused by this. And the Shroud of Turin, it was the same way, where they had scientists who said, this is how it was done. It was done this way. And then they said, oh, make another one, and nobody could do it.
Right,
so it's one of those mysterious kind of things where it's like, you can explain what might have been, like the Bigfoot, the Patterson film, where people go, it's a guy in a suit. It's obviously a guy in a suit. And then you say, do it again. And nobody has made a Bigfoot video that looks that good. And especially not with technology that was, 50, 60 years old. So it's funny that people claim to be able to explain some of these things, but then they can't replicate them.
Yeah, that's right.
I I haven't heard that particular story, but you know, there's a long-standing story or plot device of a stain that won't come up or blood stain or whatnot. Faces give that a unique, fresh look there. That way, when you were telling that story, I thought to myself, at what point would I have left that house? Because you're talking about they scrubbed the faces, they put a new floor, the faces came back. There would be no floor pouring for me. Once I tried to scrub off the thing and it didn't leave, I would leave. The faces win. You know, I'm out the door. I'm not going to wait around for another floor to be installed when I see something like that.
It depends. There's a lot of times where you have to say, you know, financially, where are you at? Because, like, if you just moved into this, or if you're renting, and then you go, hey, by the way, you know, you got a nice view of the mountainside. You know, there's 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Oh, by the way, creepy faces show up on the floor. Then you go, I'm out. I'm going next door. But if you inherit this house, maybe you don't have money to move somewhere. Then you just got to start buying bath rugs and putting them all over the floor. You know?
I mean, did they ever think about just installing carpeting?
I mean, that would be and then you would just have those muffled cries at night, you know, get off of us.
Yeah, or floating floor, anything. Good stuff there. Listen, we're going to take our break. We're halfway through, everybody. We just had another submission. This is the time. This is the 11th hour, as they say. If you're interested in having us check out what you've got to say, the voicemail on the screen now, 304-397-0810. Drop us a note, and we will be happy to listen to your tale. This is Conversations from the Dark Side. We'll be right back.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
Gravel stop on a mountain road. From all the tales I've been told, there's a monstrous ape soaked in sap atop a genuine 50s tourist trap. Step right up, that'll be $6. And when the toll bell rings, you gotta trust your luck. No hypertension or vertigo if you wanna dive in that mystery hole.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side.
All right, we are back. I am Amigo Aaron, joined by my good friend, my good buddy, Jack Flack himself, Flack Ohara, and my partner in crime and my co-conspirator, John Boatofcar Shawler. Gentlemen, someone has sent us another in-show voicemail. It's our good buddy, John Marshall. I'm going to play it for you, ladies and gentlemen, right now. Here we go.
Hey, this is John Marshall. I've got a story that ties together retro gaming and ghosts. I was over at a friend's house spending the night that lived in a haunted house, and I was playing Seventh Guest in his basement at about 1:30 in the morning, and heard a bag move in his closet, and I thought it was my imagination. I was in the maze in the basement of the Seventh Guest, as well as in the basement of this haunted house. And as I was playing, the closet door slid. So I took off, and that was in the days before I actually went and did ghost investigations. But the early days. Anyway, just thought I'd drop you this note.
Thank you, John. To recap, John was at a friend's house. He was playing that creepy old CD-ROM titled The Seventh Guest. You guys probably remember that one. It was a pretty big deal back in the CD-ROM days. And that's it, Flack. Yeah, if you had no skin. He said he was in a maze in the basement in The Seventh Guest, and he was also in the basement of a house he was staying there at. And as he was playing, the closet door slid open in the room he was in. He said he immediately left that room, and that was sort of what kicked him into ghost investigations. That experience, that would be triple creepy. Playing a scary game, and then because we all are afraid of that happening. I've played more than a few scary games, and if a door or something creaks open, or somebody were to tap on my window, I would probably have a conniption fit right there on the spot. So, thank you, John. Has it ever happened to either one of you guys playing a game, or maybe been watching a scary movie or a scary show where something happened in your around you that freaked you out?
Listen, man,
Absolutely.
that happened. That's the reason why I got rid of the VR gimmick. The second time.
That's why.
Was that I would come down here in the basement, and with the I got the thing. It was the gimmick where there was no cords. It was the Meta Quest, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I can blunder about down here in the basement, infinite space, clear all this room, and I would play these games, and I would just get paranoid that there was like somebody else in the room with me, and I couldn't see them because I had the darn thing on my face, and I got so uncomfortable. I was like, this sucks. This is no good. I freaked myself out.
What about you, Flack?
I have a very specific memory. There's a place not too far from here, maybe an hour away, that rents cabins, and so we had rented a cabin. We had taken my wife and the kids, and there was some stuff in town that they wanted to go do, and I said, you know what, I'm going to stay here at the cabin. And what I hadn't told my wife is that this is when I just first got an Xbox, the original OG Xbox. And so while we were roughing it on this camping trip, when she left, I immediately hooked this Xbox up to the TV that was in this cabin, and I'd rented a couple of games, and I don't remember specifically what the game was. But it was, I was physically in a cabin surrounded by windows, and I start this game, and it was a zombie game. And in the game, you start off in a cabin that's surrounded by windows. And then zombies start walking by the windows far away, and I'm watching that, and now I'm looking out the real windows looking for zombies. I had to turn it off. I was just sitting there freaking myself out the whole time, and then my wife comes home, and I'm like, hiding in the corner. She goes, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "Oh, it's zombies," So,
Yeah.
but it's funny how your mind can, I have a friend of mine who is he works on the fire department, but he also is a licensed paramedic. And he told me one time that one of the leading causes of heart attacks is panic attacks. And he said people will have a panic attack and they will feel their chest tighten up, and they're afraid that they're having a heart attack when they're not. But then that feeds into itself, and then they get more worked up, and then they feel, and they can work themselves up to a point where they will have a heart attack. And that's how I felt about that zombie thing. It was just like I kept feeding into my own thing, like it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Finally, I just had to turn it off, just creeping myself out.
It's funny. I had a similar experience on the Xbox. When the first night I played Call of Cthulhu Dark Quarters of the Earth, that's a real creepy game. And I was playing that at my old house in Lexington, and my roommate came stumbling in about 3 a.m, And I mean, I swear to God, I thought I was going to have a panic attack / heart attack right there on the spot. That one got me. And the VR thing, you know, there are some VR, they're usually demos or whatnot that are double scary. When I had my little crappy unit, and me and Tree were looking through some of the scary things you could download. I mean, that stuff's chilling. It's right up in your face. You know,
Yeah.
Well,
it'll get you.
I'll double what Boat was saying about that VR thing because I've got the MetaQuest, whatever, the Meta 2 or whatever. And yeah, it is. I remember not necessarily like horror, straight up horror, but there was a Jurassic Park kind of demo, you know?
I remember
and
that.
the thing is, yeah, there's something about that technology that tricks your mind where, like, I know that there's not, you know, a T-Rex in my house. Like, I know this. My brain knows this. And you put this thing on and the vision wraps all the way around so you are in that environment. And when you look left and right, you know, it moves with you. And I think the first demo had like a brontosaurus and it leaned way in, you know, like almost like the old Three Stooges 3D kind of thing, you know. And I remember leaning back in my chair, like trying to get away from it a little bit, which is ridiculous. You know, this thing is not going to touch me. Like, my brain knows that, but it's being overridden by that technology, which is a very strange feeling.
Well, you also
well, I think that VR has that ability because it is so immersive that it taps into that lizard brain part of your head that you have no control over. So
well, that's all I got. It's a lizard brain. So
it's also an isolation thing, I think, because you really, you know, when you're at home or when you're anywhere, you look around, you know, you're somewhere comfortable or you're somewhere with people. When you have that thing on, it's almost like going in a deprivation chamber. I mean, it really takes away your spatial reckoning, and your comfort zone is all gone. And if that's the kind of thing that like could be, if it can fall in the wrong hands, and I'm sure it has, there are some diabolical things that can be done with that technology. You know, now you talk about skipping a beat here. Uber Scuba Diver wrote something here that I had to comment on. And he said, I hope you didn't have to walk to an outhouse. I wouldn't want to have to leave the cabin at night. You know, I don't know how any of you guys have. I don't know if we ever touched on this, but there is something creepy about going to the outhouse in the middle of the night. That happened to me. I had some relatives back when I was younger that didn't have indoor plumbing. They had actual, this is West Virginia, brother. And still people probably have them. And that is not fun. You'd be amazed what your bladder can take at night that will prevent you from. There's two things I hated was going to the outhouse when the weather was bad, or going to the outhouse when I was creeped out. And you can be darn sure when I stayed at those houses, I was pretty young, but there's no way on earth I would want to go out there while I was watching a horror movie or something. That's a 0% chance. I mean, I'll tell you right now, a little Aaron would have peed off the porch and no one was looking. And if you could, and if that's not what you're up to, it's bad times, because I mean, it's creepy sitting in those little. I mean, if you don't know what an outhouse is, if you're not from around here, it's a picture a tall building that's just exactly as square footage wide as a toilet, and that's what you're on. It's a tall, thin, little itty bitty building that you go in. Now, some are more elaborate than others. You know, the old thing with the moon on the door is sort of not really the way it usually goes. They're a little bigger than that. And sometimes you'll maybe have something in there to like read or something, and maybe you'll have a light, you know. But usually it didn't have heat, you know, and it sucks. Have you guys ever used an outhouse?
Well, I can tell you that there were many times, because, you know, like most of my summer camp experiences were at Camp Arrowhead, not at Dilly's Mill in Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
And each campsite had its own outhouse. It was a latrine, basically. You know, it's the same thing. It's like a multi-person outhouse. There were two side-by-side seats, if you know what I mean.
The double.
And there was many a night where I chose to head to yonder tree rather than to face the sort of unscaped wilderness between my tent and the outhouse, because I was freaked out by something. Normally because of what we were talking about, because you always tell ghost stories.
Yeah.
You always try and freak each other out when you're camping.
And those outhouses, that when you're at a camp, they don't just have them like right beside the campsite. Like there's a little path, and so you're going into the woods to these things. They want to keep them.
Right.
They stink. They want to keep them away from the campsite. So yeah, I stayed at camp for years, and yes, Boat. I hadn't thought about that for a long time, but that's a good point there. Horrible stuff. Well, we'll move from outhouses back to the penthouse of ghost stories. That is. What do you got next on your list, Jack Flack?
This is actually another story from that same book. So if that wasn't enough nightmare fuel for little tiny Jack Flack, this one definitely was. This is the story of the SS Watertown. This is a true story. The SS Watertown was a oil tanker ship in the 1920s that a couple of crewmen went down into an area to clean something, and they got trapped. They were overtaken by gas fumes, and they died. In fact, another crewman went down to go check on them and saw that they were dead, and he passed out, but someone was able to retrieve him. And I think they said it took like half an hour just to rouse this guy. It was just overwhelming, it probably not, and this is the 1920s. It's not going to be OSHA compliant, It's just a bad design, whatever happened, right?
Yeah, 1920s OSHA was pretty liberal in their enforcement.
Right. So this oil tanker's out on the ocean. What do? They buried these guys at sea. So they said sayonara, and they tossed them over. I don't know how they did it, but they buried these guys at sea. And so as they went on their adventure, people on the ship started reporting seeing the ghostly faces of those two guys in the water. And they were following the ship. They were in the wake of the ship. They looked behind and you could see the faces. Sometimes the faces would come up and be in the water next to the ship. And this isn't one person that saw this. This is everybody reported seeing this. And at one point, these faces moved out in front of the ship and were moving to one side and seemed to be telling the ship to change its course. And they did change their course and avoided a giant storm that had come up that was not, it wasn't on their, I'm using radar figuratively, but it wasn't, they didn't know about this storm, but they were able to avoid it because these ghostly faces that were floating in the water tried to get them to change the route of their ship. So this gets a little creepier because at one point there was a storm that came and started hitting the SS Watertown with giant waves. And there was a guy who went to the rear of the ship, and he was up on top of something. I don't know if it like a higher deck or something on the ship, but he took a photograph of these waves hitting the ship, and in the photograph are the two faces of these sailors. Wow. Aaron, I don't know if that's something you could pull up easily or not.
I'm
but
going to have a go at it. What was the name of the ship again?
It's the SS Watertown, and you'll probably see two faces, and you may, in the most famous photograph, the most famous version of this photograph, you'll also see a couple of arrows, because that's the version that was in the book that I had, and that was the version that got floated around because someone had cropped the photo where you could just see the faces in the water, and they have these arrows that are pointing at the faces.
That is creepy. If you're listening to this, I'll describe the scene. They do have, in fact, arrows pointing over the rails of the ship there, Flack, into the water, and it looks like two sort of like semi-formed heads are floating in the water. That's how I'm seeing it.
Courtney and Meehan.
That's creepy. That's creepy right there. What do you think about this, Flack?
Well, there's a couple of different explanations for this. One is that there were two ghostly faces in the water following that, which, I mean, I guess you got to take that one. That could be one. There's also the phenomenon known as, I think it's pronounced pareidolia, but it is the phenomenon where people see faces in things. You know, I had a photo gallery on my Facebook page for a long time of all the things that I had found faces in. You know, it looked like there was a face in my coffee, or I would see a stoplight that was arranged a certain way and it looked like a face, or you would see two taillights and a chain hanging off the rear of a truck. And so our brains, and go back to something you said about our lizard brains, we are programmed to see faces because a face could mean danger. If you see someone, another human being, you need to be able to recognize that immediately to see if that's a friend or a foe, right? So that's something our brains are programmed to do, but our brains aren't perfect. So a lot of times we see faces in things that aren't really faces. So there's a possibility that these guys were seeing these waves. And the perfect example of this is everybody's seen like the face on Mars, where there was the rock and it looks like it's a carving of a face, and then but part of it's in a shadow. Well, they have pictures of it from other angles, and it doesn't really look like a face. You know, it's kind of been debunked, but that's what it looks like to us. You see, when you see that organization, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, when you see that, we're wired to think, hey, that's a face, you know? So that's a second possibility. However, if you saw that photograph, the thing about that photograph is, I mean, that looks like faces. That doesn't look like you're reading something in, you know?
Yeah.
Now, the third possible explanation is that this was at the time, this was in the height of our country when ghost photo fakery was a big thing, right? So we had lots and lots of people experimenting with the very early days of special effects in photos and taking ghost photography and faking ghost pictures and things like that. So, I mean, there is always a possibility, because we don't really know the lineage of, like, we don't have the negative to this photo, right? We basically have this. Now, there is, if you look online, you could find an uncropped version of this photo, and you can see the context in which it takes place. You can see the ship and the wave, and you can see these two faces in the wave coming up over the edge of the ship. So now that doesn't explain why all the other sailors on this boat reportedly saw this. That doesn't explain, the ship altering its course. And by the way, this whole story does sound like a BS story, right? It sounds like a ghost story you would tell kids and you go, oh, there was these ghostly faces. But people have gone back and looked, and it is documented that those two guys did die. I mean, that is actually true. Those guys died. They were buried at sea. So that all happened. So we're kind of left with this strange photograph. And let me tell you, as an 8-year-old kid, now I couldn't walk on the tile or take a bath because there's just ghost faces all over the dang place, you know? So, again, I'll turn it over to you guys and ask you what you think of this. And I would say this, they almost look too good. They almost look too good to be accidental, especially they both of them, you know, and also they kind of look similar. They almost look like they might be the same person. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
Go ahead,
It's interesting that you say that this happened during the height of sort of photo fakery. I didn't realize that was like a that was sort of there was a peak when it came to that sort of stuff. So were there other phenomenon that were happening around the same time that are like famous faked photos of supernatural events?
There's tons of that.
Yes.
There's tons and tons.
Yeah, what's it, Conan Doyle with the fairy photos.
Yeah.
That would have been around that same time where the girls went into the forest and said that they saw fairies. They came home late. This was the story. I'm kind of going by memory, but these two girls went off to play in the woods. They came home late. They got in trouble, and the parents said, you know what, you're in trouble. Why are you late? And they said, well, we saw fairies. And then the parents said, now you're grounded for lying and being late. And so the next day, the girl said, hey, can we borrow the camera? They went out to the woods, and they came back, and they had photos of fairies. The photos were, and the fairies were dancing on leaves and posed around them. And these photos are also out there. And anybody that sees these photos go, wow, those look a lot like paper cutouts of fairies, which turned out to be exactly what they were. They're not very convincing to me. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle looked at these photos and was like, 100% these are legit fairy photos. And so he had kind of loaned this authenticity to the photos. And so I think it was the girls were like on their deathbed or something when they admitted it. And then someone went back and found like a coloring book of fairies from around that same time that were like, yeah, these look exactly like the fairies that these girls had. But yeah, this was... there was a lot that, I mean, this would have been around, when did Houdini die? Early 30s?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. So, that same type of thing where people were starting to do all these, spirit, talking with spirits and doing shows and charging money for these things. But yeah, spirit photography was around that time, had kind of emerged. And it was kind of a thing too, because people didn't know what kind of trick, like they didn't understand double exposures in photographs, or one very simple trick. Oh, there's Aaron's got a picture of the fairies on the screen right now, if you can see that. But one thing that people didn't realize was that you could basically take a photo and then put something on top of, like physically put something on top of that photo, and then take another photo of that, which is the way a lot of early UFO pictures were faked. People would take a picture, of a mountainside view and have that print done, and then they would lay a button or something on top of that, and then take a photo of the button on top of that background. And now you have a original undocumented print, a negative, that you can give to someone and say, this negative has not been modified, which is, not how it was done. So yeah, there was a lot of early, photography kind of tricks people were experimenting with. So it's possible that this is one of those as well.
It's funny that you should mention Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, because a lot of people don't know that his wife was like sort of a medium, all right? And, of course, Doyle lived right around the same time as Harry Houdini, which you mentioned. And, of course, Houdini famously would debunk all these scam artists that were because there were millions of them. They were taking people to the cleaners, in that time period. And so Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did not like Houdini. And I was just listening to a radio show the other day where they were mentioning that Houdini's mother passed away. And, of course, Houdini was a big-time mama's boy, if you know anything about him. I mean, he's a big-time mama's boy. And Arthur Conan Doyle's wife said that his mother came to her in a dream, and she wrote down all the stuff that the mom said and said, here you go, Houdini, proof. He's like, listen, she was Hungarian. She barely spoke English, So they, you can imagine how that went over with Sir Arthur. But yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle was a big-time into the paranormal, seances, spirit photography. And if you look at the spirit photography back in those days, like I said, it's kind of laughable now. They'll have people like sitting there beside like Abe Lincoln and stuff. It's real goofy, but it was a thing, But with all that said, I don't necessarily think that the picture we saw of the sailors, it doesn't look like something that I would have seen. It almost looks like something that like Mr. Sharp from the King of Chicago would have like made out of clay and stuck in the
Right.
water. You know, Doug would have done that, put it out there. They look almost made of water. And so it's an interesting tale. I don't know if I'd ever heard that. I'm surprised because that seems like something I would have known about. That's scary stuff to think about. And I like the tales that you hear because, you know, again, the sea, when you're in the sea, you're sort of separated from everybody else. You know, is that a mermaid? Is that a sea monster? Are those ghosts? Is someone knocking on the bottom of the boat? Like, we don't know. And there's no one to complain to because we're out in the middle of the ocean, you know? I think that's one of the creepier jobs to have would be someone that worked on a ship.
Yeah. Going back to just for a second to Houdini, and since we are coming up on Halloween, I'm sure you probably know this, but for those of you who don't know this story, Houdini was an avid exposer of fakery. He hated mediums and seances and all those things, and he went out of his way to debunk every single one of them. He was kind of like the first Amazing Randy, if you will. You know, he was the guy that was against all of that. And so one of the things he knew was that when he died, like like a lot of us, he wanted to know if there really was not just an afterlife, but wanted to know if you could communicate with the living. And so he came up with a secret phrase that he told his wife, Bess, and had her memorize it. And it was actually something that she had written on a bracelet, and it was part of the lyrics, I believe, from an old poem. But it started with the word Rosabelle. And so he had her memorize this code. And so people would say, I have contacted the great Houdini. And she would say, okay. And she would go there and say, you know, he would say, I'm talking to Houdini now. And she would say, what is the code? And no one was ever able to exactly deliver the code. Now, something interesting that happened very late in her life was that someone did deliver the code. Someone gave, and it's not just the word Rosabelle, the whole code, I just looked it up here. It says it was the name of a song and part of their act. And the code was Rosabelle, answer, tell, pray, answer, look, tell, answer, tell. And someone came up with that and told her that. Now, here's the problem. Bess also, in her later years, began suffering from dementia. And so it is believed that she may have told the code to someone, and then it got to this person who did this, which is really kind of a sad story, you know. But throughout the majority of her life, all these times, she wanted nothing more than, you know, she held out hope that Houdini would be able to reach out and talk to her from the other side of the grave. And Houdini, you know, was one of those people that, I'm sure would have made him, like, if he had been able to deliver that code, that would have been like groundbreaking, right?
Yeah.
So that was that little system. But there was always, you know, like a lot of those stories, depending on when it was written and where you read it, sometimes they will say, you know, that sometimes he did get the code, but they leave out the part that she, you know, did have Alzheimer's late in life, and that it's very probable that she spilled the code to someone else, and then someone fed it back to her. So that's most likely.
I'd never heard the code, and I'd never heard that someone got it. Because as I recall, they stopped doing the seances. I believe was the last one in like 36 or 37. It was real. I mean, but I think other people carried on in like an unconventional capacity, trying to, because you know at that point, at some point, the code became public knowledge. Not the answer, but that there was one. You know,
right?
They actually held seances for many years after his death to try to get in there. it's funny to me that a guy like, and you mentioned him, Amazing Randy, it's very similar. I mean, here's a guy who, like, his whole trade is being mysterious and supernatural, but here's a guy who goes and stumps all these other people that are trying to get away with something. I love Houdini, but I always felt that, you're also, when you go out and do that, you're sort of depriving a lot of people of getting by in life. I guess they're tricking people, but I mean, so is he in a weird way, but I always found it fascinating that he had enough foresight to tell his wife that there'd be a code when he died, especially since he died so young, but it's an interesting story. I'd never heard that someone cracked it. I would like to have seen the look on her face when that happened.
Yeah, well, so I was a very early fan of Houdini. I got a paperback book in like 4th or 5th grade of Houdini. In fact, we did a thing at school one time where we had to be, do like a history report of a celebrity or, of a famous person from history. And I did Houdini. And when I came out to give my speech, I had this very, very simple chain with a lock on it that literally, if you just turned your hands, you could pull your hand out of it, But I went up to the class and I said, "I am Harry Houdini." And I turned around and showed that my hands were locked. And I turned back around and said, the master of escapes. And then I pulled my hand down and picked up the paper, and I read the paper and did all these things with my hands. And then at the very end, I reached back and I stuck my hands back in the chains and turned around to show that I was still bound by the chains, But now this Houdini story, and by the way, one of the reasons why I brought it up is because, Houdini died on Halloween night, October 31st. So I've told this story to my wife, and my wife has said we should have a code. And I said, that's a great idea. And here's the problem. We've had this conversation 100 times, and we can never remember the code. We argue, like one time it was like Yoda's butt was going to be the code.
You need to get a bracelet for her that says Yoda's butt on the inside. I want to see the engraver's face on that one. So I need Yoda's butt here.
Something where we won't forget it, because that's the thing. I'll be on the other side. I'll be like, Yoda's butt, and she'll go, "Nah, that wasn't it. I don't know."
Can you imagine how infuriating that would be? Is you're on the other side, you're trying to make contact with your loved one and don't remember the code. You're screaming it. Come on, baby.
Or I forget it. That'd be the worst part. I get over there and like, God, geez, what was it? Hamburger? Was it Wampa? I don't know. Yeah, so we're gonna have to find a code to stick with.
Good stuff there. Listen, we're going to take our last break. For you in the chat, we appreciate you hanging with us this long. We are down to the last 20 or so minutes for the year of Conversations with the Darkside. So if you've got anything you want to chime in with in chat, on the phone, text message, whatever you got, this is your last chance. We're heading to our final commercial break of this year. You're listening and watching Conversations from the Dark Side.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Dark Side. You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
And we're back. This is our final segment on Conversations in the Dark Side. We're talking about ghost stories. You know, Uber Scuba Diver just mentioned in the chat, it's an interesting question. I wonder if coal miners have their own flavor of ghost stories from the underground. You know, I did have a chance to discuss mining with my grandfather, who was a coal miner for over 40 years. I worked for the mines for over 50 years. And he spent a lot of time down there. And I would wager if you asked your average coal miner of what they thought about ghosts and underground stuff, they would probably say that they had no idea, because these guys went down there and it was loud and they were working nonstop. And this is old school mining, where you've got hand machines. And I don't know if Pawpaw was in. I'd wager he was in when they were using the non-mechanical stuff too, because he was there from he was in it forever, you know, for 40 years. But I know he told me that when he was down there, it was a business, because you had to be very careful with what you were up to. I had no doubt that people had some kind of experiences underground, in terms of coal mining, but I would wonder if there were anyone there to pay attention to it because of all the action down there and all the noise. Have you guys heard of anybody having any sort of coal mining experiences with the paranormal?
Well, yeah, I think that's the to have creepy experiences. Usually, you've got to be one, alone, and two, you've got to be silent, because the creepiness usually happens at low volumes. And so, you know, I've never been in a real coal mine, but I've been to the exhibition coal mine, and I've seen what goes on down there. And there's not a lot of quiet time in the coal mine.
Have you ever been deep in a cave? Either one of you?
I have.
You know, it's there's a level of, and you mentioned this during one of your movie reviews on a couple weeks ago about those chicks that got into the cave. I used to go to a lot of caves. West Virginia has a lot of caves. We don't have monster caves like Kentucky's cave system, or, you know, other countries, but we've got a lot of caves here. And I've been in more than a couple. In fact, this is the shtick they always do, isn't it? They get you deep in this sucker, and they shut off all the lights in the cave.
Right, yep.
And then that's a level of dark that you can't understand until you've experienced it. It's thick dark, thick black, inky dark. And I can't imagine. There's a cave we went to called Lost Cave, where the dude lived in the cave for a long time, and I can't imagine what that was like, because that would be double creepy. So I'm sure there are some ghost stories that come out of the cave. None for me, because I never stayed in that dark sucker long enough to see a ghost. You guys ever hear anything about creepy caves?
Well, I will tell you that we several years ago, 5 years ago, we rented a bed, or like a bed and breakfast, or Airbnb that was located inside a cave. It was in Arkansas, and we went, and it literally, it was furnished kind of like a house, but the floor was concrete, the walls were cave, there was stalactites coming, like we were in a cave, and they said included. They called us and they said, are you interested in going on a cave tour? And I said, nope. But the kids were. And they said, well, here's the thing, is it will be through an area. And basically they said you'll have to duck. There may be low roof areas. There's a little area where there's a ladder. There may be bats. It was all these things that I thought, none of this sounds appealing to me. And so they came to where we were staying in this room, and then, to come, I guess, get the kids to take them on this tour. And they walked through our living room, and there was a door that was locked that I thought was like a broom closet. And they opened it up. They said, let's go. I go, that's the beginning of the tour off of our living room. And it was. And they were like, all right. They took off, and I was like, are bats going to come out through this doorway? So, yeah,
that's awesome,
I was not real thrilled about that. I do remember when the kids were little, one time we went to Merrimack Caverns, which is a cave system. I think it's in Missouri. It was something that we always passed on our drive when I was a kid on the way to Chicago. You know, it was one of those roadside attraction kind of things. So we went to Merrimack Caverns. We took our kids there. And we got the last tour of the night. It was 6. They closed like at 6 p.m. and we didn't know. We got there like 5:50, and they said, "Well, you know, it's the last group. We'll take you if you want to go." I said, "Okay." And so we had a tour guide, and he took us into the first cavern room, you know, and he said, "This is the opening of Merrimack Caverns." You know, there's a little area. They said, "We think Frank and Jesse James hid in that little," you know, they give you all the spiel, right? You know?
Yeah.
And they said, "Okay, we're going to move into the second room." And as we were moving into the second room, that guy flipped off the lights because we were the last tour of the day. And he was turning off the lights behind us as we made our way through the system, right? And I told my wife, I said, you better see where that rope is. Like there was a rope kind of gangway kind of thing to hold on to on the side. I said, "You better find that." I said, because if that guy dies, we're going to just live in this cave for the rest of our lives. Like I can't get at it. Like, you're just in pitch black, you know? But you are right when you describe that darkness. It is a darkness where it's not like closing your eyes, or at night when you close your eyes, but you can still see the light. And you know, when you're in bed and you close and it's dark, and then 5 minutes later your eyes kind of adjust and you start to see things again. You know, it ain't like that. I mean, it is like black soup. I mean, there's nothing. And yeah, that's a scary feeling to be down there.
You know, we got an interesting note here from Dave and Sharon Very over on the YouTube chat. He says, or she, "I was doing a plumbing repair alone in the crawl space of a large cabin in the woods, of course, and I could hear a chair moving on the floor above me. I got back upstairs and no one was around. I went back to work, same thing, banging and chair moving. I went up with my cell phone on record and still no one was around." I know how that would have ended up for me, Mr. Missaveri. I would have been out of the cabin. I've seen enough Evil Dead films that I wouldn't have went down into the crawl space of a cabin in the first place.
Well, there's actually a really obvious explanation for that.
I heard the creepiest noise just now. I swear to God.
I told you before when I was telling the ghost story.
Somewhere it's making a horrible noise.
The cat was zooming around in here, and I was like, "Oh, don't tell ghost stories." No, there's when the furniture, when it was up there, there's an obvious explanation for that.
Yeah.
And that's where the ghost was making the waffles that was going to bring to my room. He was up there. He's got to make them somewhere. That guy gets around, man. Waffle ghost.
Boat, any cave experience for you?
You know, I've only been in caves, well, you know, a couple times, and they've always been in large groups, you know, Mammoth Cave and all, Carter Caves. So no, I mean, to me, the scariest part about caves is not the ghosts. It's like Rob said, like, what if there's an emergency, all the lights go out and you're stuck there for the rest of your life? Or those guys in the kids in Thailand on the soccer team.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's enough of natural things to be terrified in caves, let alone the ghosts.
You know, and me and Teresa went to an Oregon cave a couple years ago with Luke, and we were in the bowels of this cave, and there was only 4 or 5 people in the tour, and one of the guys that came in late, and so he was like, "Listen, I want you to come back and explain this other stuff to me." You know, they wanted him to, and so the tour goes, "Okay." He goes, "The rest of you can just head back on your own." Okay, this is a long cave, and it's dark, and so there's railings, but I mean, and there were little lights beside the railing, but that was it. And let me tell you something, that was one scary proposition to walk out of there. And then you walk, this is one of those caves that you walk upstairs to like leave, you know, so you're looking up at the sky. And I thought to myself, if something were to block that passage suddenly, that would be the scariest experience of my life, coming out of this hole in the ground. But it was, yeah, that's a special level of creepy being down in those places.
Well, you know, I mentioned this, I don't know if on one of these streams, but recently we did a cruise. We went to Mexico, we went to the Yucatan, and we got to go to a cenote which cenote translates to sinkhole. It is literally a hole in the ground that you go down into a cave that holds water and you get to swim in it. And we went, literally the four of us in our group, we were the only four people there. Like the people on the tour didn't go down there with us. They just said, there it is. So they walked us to where this thing is. And when you get there, it's like a hole in the earth. It's not, there's no neon lights or nothing. It's not like someone built an entrance that says, welcome to the cenote. It's a hole in the ground. And you look down there and some guy built 30 steps out of some old 2x4s you found somewhere. And you're going down there. And I'm telling you what, when you're going down there and when you're down there, you have these thoughts. You go, you know what? If I'm down here and I break my leg swimming in this thing, like my friends can't haul me out of this. They're not going to haul me up 30 steps. That's just it. I'm just dead. I live in a cenote now. That's the end of my life. So yeah, it's kind of weird, man. Those places are, and by the way, there are hundreds and hundreds of cenotes in the Yucatan, and they're all connected to the same water source, all of them. So as we were in a pool of water that was 5 foot deep, and probably 30 by 30, this big area. And there's no light, just the light that's coming in from this hole that the whole time I keep thinking, I hope that hole don't close, because now we live down here. And we're looking at the water is clear. It's so pretty. You're seeing the rocks underneath there and everything. And in the corner, there's a big black hole. And I said, what's that? And they go, well, that goes down underground to the other cenotes or whatever. And I go, nope. I'm not standing anywhere near. I mean, in my head, there's somebody flushes the toilet, we all go down that hole. And I'm going somewhere. I'm not no part of that. Nope. I was fine to stand right by the steps going down.
You know, speaking of looking up something, I want to mention this. This is slightly off base here, but it was something in the chat that is an interesting little tidbit here from Ben666, aptly named. He says, in the UK, a few hospitals had an optical illusion put into emergency rooms, something that could only be seen from the ceiling, to see if anyone having an out-of-body experience could see it. No one has ever reported seeing it. An interesting tidbit there. The old out-of-body experience. I'm surprised, actually, about that.
That's your NHS dollars at work right there.
Hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with that, Boat. I don't have any problem at all with someone trying something like that. You know, it's kind of neat. It's kind of an interesting thing to put into a hospital like that. Well, geez, you know, fellas, we've been going here for a couple hours. I had a lot of fun tonight. This was a really enjoyable set of shows this year for me personally. It's by far my favorite season of Conversations from the Dark Side. I want to thank everyone that sent in the little clips and stories and said stuff in chat. I just love that. That's really what we want the show to be about, is to just, because really the best storytellers are the people whom we haven't met, who have stories we haven't heard. And those are the ones that when you share those with everybody, it's a joyous thing.
And with that, we'd like to bring on the Chud.
That's right, bring on the Chud. I want to say a special thanks to Boat, who sat in for the whole duration. I hope you didn't get too scared, Boat.
No, man. No, man. I'll probably get scared after we're done, though.
Any Halloween thoughts before we move on? I guess
I'll need the razor blades.
There you go. Now, I also want to thank our good buddy, the co-host, Conversations with the Dark Side, the little engine that could, Rob Flack O'Hara. Rob, I'm so happy that you shared the experience with me this year. And we had I think we had a pretty good time. I know I did. Do you have any final Halloween thoughts to lay on the people?
Boy, you know, it's been a fun participating in the shows. And I think that one of the best things for me is that I get as much out of them as we put into it. You know, it's fun, like sharing all those horror movies, what we talked about, horror movies and scary movies. But you mentioned a lot that I hadn't seen. You mentioned what was it, the Tales of the Unexpected show, the Roald Dahl. which I've been watching those. That's something I'd never heard of, So that's the most fun for me. Like I said, it's telling stories and sharing stories like that, but also, hearing the stuff that you guys have. So I will be looking for. Now I think a lot of times, like sometimes in life we don't seek out things. We just get to a point in life where we just let life happen to us, And so now that I know if we are going to do this again next year, that's going to be my goal. Maybe I'll find some haunted hotels. Maybe I'll go find another cave. Maybe I'll find some other stuff to do.
We'll do an
between now and next year. Absolutely.
Previous year. I don't know if I wouldn't get on a boat. Let's put it that way. You better hope those dudes are floating around or you're going to hit something. Hey, listen, thanks again. I want to thank everybody who have been downloading the show, listening in podcast form. We appreciate you guys. We've had a real good success this year, a stunningly good success. And lastly, I want to wish everyone a happy and safe Halloween, if that's your bag. When you're listening to this, the holiday will be upon us. Trust me, go out, take your kids, take them door to door, get some candy, watch some scary shows, tell them a ghost story, because this is the spice of life. It really is. And I think that this is a great way to spend time with your loved ones, the kids, or ask your mother and father, your grandfolks, about their haunted past, and you may be pleasantly surprised with what they've seen and heard. It'll be a good time, and it's a good bonding exercise of anything else. That's all I got, everybody. On behalf of the boys, have a happy Halloween, and we'll catch you next year on Conversations from the Dark Side.
You have just experienced Conversations from the Dark Side. Until next week, try to enjoy the daylight.